Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Apocastastasis, an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut. Today, I'm being joined again by Dylan Moore and Nima Majur. How you doing, guys?
Doing excellent.
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you. So in this episode for the audience here, in this episode of A Conversation With, we are continuing our series looking at Carol Quigley's book, The Evolution of Civilizations. Today, we're really going to get down and dirty with the history of Western civilization and Quigley's idea of declines that in Western history kind of rally again and again, which is something that's unique, as Quigley will point out. For the announcement here, and of course I want to hear what the gentlemen have for Arita TV, but as far as Apocastastasis is concerned, I would encourage everyone this spring of 2024, believe it or not, we're in the spring, to check out our various events related to our 10th anniversary. We've completed 10 full years, and we have all sorts of things. We have a dinner going on here in New Milford. We have some online commemorations, and one of the real high points is our seminar looking at grade education. And you can see the special tab for that. If no one was looking, what would grade education look like? You can see that tab on our main website. You can see that ticker down below. But before you do that, check out Arita TV, and the two gentlemen here are going to tell us what they've been getting into in their own presentations, and we'll get on to our subject.
Well, thanks, John. At Arita TV, as normal, we're trying to stir up as much as we can on the economic front. The standard understandings of economics, we kind of I don't know what's the best way we should put it. We kind of throw them out the window. And we're also kind of working on a new project that we don't want to speak of at this moment, but it's going to be big. Yeah, that's as far as I want to say on it. Nima, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's a good summary, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this is part 3, essentially, of this talk we've been having about this book, The Evolution of Civilizations by Carol Quigley. And not just looking at it in terms of, well, here's this interesting book that we could review, but really, how do we extract this and apply it to our current situation and apply it to how to not just to better understand our society and civilization, but how we could function in it better and improve it. And the first hour, I guess, the first show that we did, we talked about the core concept. And I guess the quickest way for us to summarize that core concept is that any societal organization that's created to achieve a goal is at some point going to develop a vested interest that is more interested within that organization, that is more interested in feeding itself and serving itself than it is in achieving the goal of whatever that organization was supposed to be. The examples that we gave was like the media. What's the purpose of journalistic media? Well, in a ideal world, we could say, well, the purpose of journalistic media is to inform the citizenry of what's happening within the society. And what we have now is a journalistic media that prevents citizenry from understanding what's in society with a goal of, I mean, we can guess at the goals, but maybe one of the goals is getting paid by very, very wealthy advertisers, for example, right? And
brought to you by Pfizer.
Yeah, brought to you by Pfizer, exactly. Then Quigley gets into there's a unique type of social organization within a civilization that really defines a civilization, which he calls the instrument of expansion. And the instrument of expansion is a societal organization that creates surplus, economic surplus in ancient civilizations. This is basically food, right? Saves that economic surplus and then reinvests that economic surplus into new invention that allows you to create even more economic surplus that you could save and reinvent and save and reinvent. When a civilization reaches this phase, it grows. And this is kind of the phase where you can recognize, hey, there's a civilization right here. At some point, that instrument of expansion institutionalizes where there's a vested interest that, okay, the surplus is still being made, the savings are still happening, but the reinvestment doesn't happen. There's some vested interest that's eating more and more of the surplus that's being generated by society. So the society gets to enjoy the surplus or receive the benefits of the surplus less and less and less. And this is where the society ends up, or the civilization ends up in conflict, which we went over in the last show what exactly conflict entails. It's basically we don't have enough money to pay for everybody. I mean, we do, but there's this vested interest eating it. So let's start a bunch of foreign wars to get resources from abroad and kill off a lot of these people that we don't have to pay for anymore. Right? And at some point, the instrument of expansion becomes so broken down and the civilization is so incapable of providing to its population along the original ethos that nobody believes in that original ethos, to the point where foreign invaders will come in, conquer the civilization, and they just destroy it because there's nobody left that even cares about the ethos of the original civilization. That's where we left off last time, with the idea of looking at Western civilization, because Western civilization has not followed this typical trajectory. Now, the trajectory had 7 stages, as John's got pulled up here, or Nima. I don't know who pulled that up. And with, I kind of focused on stage 3 and stage 4, which is the age of expansion, the age of conflict, because that's usually the real exciting part of what's happening within a civilization. What Western civilization has done is it's gone to expansion and then conflict. And then before it went to the age of universal empire, where one society within that civilization ends up conquering the whole thing. For example, the Romans in classical civilization, or the Persians in Mesopotamian civilization, or the Tokugawa shogunate in Japanese civilization, the Aztecs in Mesoamerican civilization, and so on. Right as that was about to happen in Western civilization, a new instrument of expansion was developed, which made the attempts to conquer it the old way just irrelevant. One of the ways I like to say it is, okay, Universal Empire, you just won the War of Swords. Great. We just invented muskets, so have fun. And then, even more amazingly, Western civilization has done this multiple times to say, okay, you just won the War of Muskets. Great. We just invented machine guns, so have fun. So what we wanted to do today was really look at this trajectory through Western civilization and get a little bit more specific, because it brings us to today, what we're looking at today. And personally, I think this is some serious hope for how to move forward, because if we look at the internet or social media for a few minutes, there's a trope that's pushed forward a lot that America, or the West in general, is looking like the final stages of Rome before Rome collapsed. And if we look at how Quigley has expertly broken down how civilizations function, or his hypothesis on how civilizations function, I don't believe that's the case. Or we don't believe that's the case. And we are still completely in a spot where this can be turned around. And we have 3 prior examples. 1, 2, 3 prior examples of Western civilization doing this before. So there's no reason we can't do it again.
Yeah, very much a counter narrative than what one hears.
Yes. Yeah, on this chart that or in this list that we're looking at here, basically you could draw an arrow from step 4 back to step 3. So what Dylan was just explaining is it doesn't have to be a deterministic progression. Carol Quigley has identified that Western civilization has gone from conflict to expansion multiple times, and we can absolutely do it again.
So shall we get into the beginning of Western civilization and start walking ourselves through it? Because
for
it's
sure,
exciting.
For sure.
So,
and if I can interject here, as we're setting this out here, I think one of the things that we need to recapture is how unique Western civilization is. Maybe in the past couple of decades, it's kind of been taken down a few pegs in the discourse and the historiography. But certainly the generation Quigley was writing, there was that appreciation of the uniqueness of Western Civ. And I think as we're trying to understand that, maybe we might want to dust off that appreciation ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's kind of what we're getting at here. And I'll worry about that in a second. So in order to understand Western civilization, we got point one here, which is mixture. A new civilization comes about when two societies intermix, which gives the opportunity for a new culture to arise. And if that new culture, by some grand accident, invents an instrument of expansion, you now have the potential for a civilization to grow forth. And one of the places that there's a high likelihood of this happening is if you have a civilization that died, that on where the periphery of that civilization was, which is bumped up to some exterior society, is where you're going to get a good chance of that mixture happening, which is going to lead to a new civilization. This is exactly what happened in the West. So when Roman civilization collapses, and I should actually be careful when I say that, when classical civilization collapses, of which the Romans were the universal empire of, right? They control Greece, they control North Africa, they control the Levant. I mean, these included, prior civilizations, but anything that had to do with the kind of classical ideal. And I think the easiest way to think of that is like the classical Greek gods, of which the Romans had the same gods, but with different names. That gets entirely conquered by Roman civilization. Now, by the time we get to the end of Roman civilization, it's in full decay. There's no one left interested in defending the ethos. And of course, I'm only talking about the West here. The East survives much longer. And Germanic invaders come in and wipe the thing out. So now we have the mixture between the old Romans and the Germanic invaders. And it starts with the fact that once the city started hollowing out, because Rome was like the biggest city on earth for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It was the one city to make it like over 1 million people until the 1800s or some crazy number statistic like that. And once those people hollowed out, they had to attach themselves to two things. One, food. They had to get out far enough into the countryside where they could attach themselves to the food producing land. The second was security. And when it comes to security, you have to be aware of the military technology at the time. And Quigley points out that one of the reasons that the Roman Empire fell is because the Roman army, was so institutionalized it could not adapt to defend itself against Germanic charging riders on horseback. So what developed as the supreme military weapon was the mounted knight on horseback. Now, the mounted knight on horseback is,
I think that battle was Adrianople, just for reference.
I don't remember. Okay. Thank you.
There was a big battle where it was a real contrast between the old ossified Roman legions and the cavalry, and that was Adrianople, and that's a real turning point.
I want to look that one up. Thank you.
And it was that when Odo Aker sacked Rome, or
no? I think Adrianople was towards the east there, but it was that very heady time in that neck of the woods.
Okay.
So, in terms of a specialized military weapon, in contrast with a general military weapon, a specialized military weapon, only a small group of people can participate in that military technology because it either takes a ton of training, a ton of money, or both. A general military weapon would be, for example, the American Revolution, where the most advanced military weapon at the time was a musket and a cannon, and almost anybody could get a hold of that. So you could have this mass army of everybody that you could hand a musket to, and it was cheap and easy to train on. We are not in a situation like this at the beginning of Western civilization. And in order to fund or support one mounted knight on horseback, you needed about 50 to 100 people working in food production to not only support the knight, but to support the horse, because the horse competes directly with humans for food. So this is where you start getting the feudal manners. The people from the cities come out. They need to attach themselves to the land, and they need the security of the mounted knight on horseback. And these knights, if you know your history, they trained all day for fighting. That's all they did all day, was train for fighting. Now, we got ourselves into a situation where you get these independent manors that not only are independent because they're independent economically, but the military technology and the social organization at the time really prevents any manor from conquering the other one, because the castle is the other important military technology, and a castle can't beat a knight, and it's really hard for a knight to beat a castle. You have to put it under siege, and at the time, if you only owed your lord 40 days of military service throughout the year, a 40-day siege isn't that hard to to hold out on, right? So we established these independent military manors, and I would say this is kind of the gestation phase. We had point number 2 there, gestation. And the initial economic activity comes from the manors exchanging luxury goods between each other. So the knight accrues the savings because they're getting more in economic surplus than they're giving out in justice and law and protection to their serfs. They get the surplus, and if they reinvest it into roads, for example, to help the transportation of the luxury goods, we now have a system of production or surplus, savings, and invention. And I believe he calls this, what term does he give this? We have it right here. Nima gave it to me. Yes.
You mean chivalry? You mean feudalism?
Feudalism, I believe. Or, no. What did we have it here?
Chivalry.
Municipal capitalism or municipal commercial capitalism. So it's easy for us in Western civilization to take capitalism for granted, which everybody and his dog has their own definition for at this point. And I don't want to like assume what the definition of capitalism is, but Quigley gives this very neutral, basic definition, which is pursuit of profit within a price structure, which I think is a great definition of it.
Individual pursuit of profit within a price structure.
Individual pursuit of profit within a price structure. So at the beginning, when these goods are start being traded, people make more money when they increase the flow of goods. Now, something happens when you start increasing the flow of goods too much, is everything starts getting really cheap. And then at some point, those in charge, on the verge of becoming vested interests, discover that they can increase their income by restricting the flow of goods through licenses, through guilds, through permits, through, you can only buy and sell in this spot on this time of the day and you need a permit for that stall. Whatever it is they start restricting the flow of goods. And when we look at, I don't want to spend a bunch of time flipping through a book, but I think it's worth pointing out that because the instrument of expansion starts breaking down and people aren't receiving the benefits that they would receive from these surpluses, it gets complicated by the fact that the feudal lords whose job is a military function, like this is basically a militaristic or a political instrument of expansion, they are not allowed to engage in commerce by custom. And as prices begin to, as prices begin to increase because there's a normal inflation that happens, these lords were on fixed incomes. So I think Quigley points out it never gets to the point where it's so bad that prices triple over 300 years or whatever, and they're still working off an income that was from 300 years ago. But that kind of gives you the point of where they were, and now they're not allowed to participate in economic society or capitalistic society. So the only way for them to make money is to go to war. So when the Pope starts asking for the Crusades or any other war that's going on, they are eager and ready to go because it's the only way for them to start making money. And we're now very clearly in an age of conflict. And what do we call the age of conflict here? I think mercantilism is the term that Quigley ends up using.
So yeah, because I don't know where you are actually exactly in the timeline now, because you're sort of talking freely, but we've created a flow chart kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, let me get this. Keep talking. I'll get this flow chart.
Yeah, and I wrote the bullet points next to it there.
Oh, great, great.
So just to give some more dates on what Dylan was talking about just now. Rome breaks apart, and you have this kind of chaotic situation of different civilizations having fallen apart, different people trying to figure things out. That was about 350 to 700. That was the Western civilization's dawn, basically. And that's the stage of mixture, 350 to 700. Then we have, as Dylan was pointing out, we have this power system of feudalism emerging with feudal lords owning the feudal manors and having serfs produce food surplus for them. Yeah, so that's the phase of gestation where Western civilization develops its instrument of expansion, and that's between 700 and 970. And one thing to point out also is that was a more automatic control type of system versus planned systems. So you had different feudal lords, operating independently with serfs, working on the adjacent farms and delivering food surplus to the feudal lords. So the feudal lords acquired a lot of power in this period. Obviously, 700 to 970, right? That's a period where I guess at one point the Vikings land in England, and England is still in feudalism. And then we get into what Dylan was just transitioning into, which is municipal commercial capitalism, which is basically, and I'm sorry, you see that, Dylan, can you add a 0 down there?
No, I made a PDF because I wasn't able to get the PowerPoint in a space where I could zoom in enough where I think anyone would see it. So I had to make a PDF. Yeah.
So it says they're 970 to 120, but that's supposed to be 970 through 1200. So according to Quigley, the feudalism, so after feudalism, we get into Western civilization's first phase of expansion, which he calls municipal commercial capitalism, which basically means that these feudal lords start trading luxury goods and specialty goods amongst one another, and some sort of system of trade emerges, right? So I put some bullet points here. This is probably the first time we see capitalism emerge in Western civilization. And as Dylan said earlier, capitalism, of course, is a system of individual profit generation within a price structure. And municipal means obviously you had different city-states and you had trade emerging between these city-states. That's why it's municipal commercial capitalism. The typical organization was a company. It was municipality managed, and we moved from automatic control to more conscious control. So the cities asserted more control over planning how this kind of system functioned. And that was from 970 through 1200. So, Dylan, what you were just asking, what we call, this is what you were asking. What do we call this system?
Yeah, so this institutionalized feudalism is called chivalry. I got the book open.
Yes, feudalism. Yeah, previously institutionalized into chivalry. Yeah, and it became irrelevant with the advent of commercial capitalism because now the power is basically in the hands of those who can trade a lot of goods, and even the feudal lords depend on them because they want to have access to the trading. They want to have those specialty goods. They probably give them some more power too. It was probably involved some small manufactured military items and stuff like that. So yeah, feudalism became chivalry. Then municipal commercial capitalism appears, and municipal commercial capitalism, if you can scroll down a little bit, basically was now from 1270 through 1440. We enter the stage, the first conflict of Western civilization, which happened when England tried to take control of municipal commercial capitalism. And what happened now was, once again, England was not allowed to take this kind of control over this municipal commercial capitalist system, because a new kind of expansion phase emerged. And if you can scroll down a little bit, Dylan, we have now expansion number 2 from around 1440 through 1690, and Quigley calls this state commercial capitalism. And it's basically profit through exchange of goods between states and not just between individual cities. So it's just, that's why it's still a type of commercial capitalism, but Quigley...
And then just to define that quickly, I got the book open right here.
Yeah.
Quigley says one aspect of this change from municipal to state is the shift from institutionalized Mediterranean commerce to instrumental Atlantic commerce. So basically bigger boats on being able to go further.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was the period of the great adventures, the great seafaring empires, beginning to explore the oceans, right? And disclosing new land, finding new peoples who had no clue what was going on, who didn't really value the goods they had the way we valued them. So there was a lot of good deals to be made with a lot of native tribes. And so...
And one of the things that strikes me just in this neck of the woods, Nima and Dylan, is if you look at 1440 here, in 1453, you have the day the world ends, and you have two things happen in short order, and that is one, Constantinople falls to the Turks,
right?
And so that completely shifts commerce in the Mediterranean, because now the Turks are calling the show, and so Venice and Genoa and things who used to have the pick of the litter in terms of commerce in the Mediterranean. And all of a sudden, things are completely thrown into a tizzy with the fall of Constantinople. And then you have, just as you were talking about, the invention of the lateen sail and the ability to go out into the Atlantic for much farther distances and along the coast of Africa and things. So it's a marvelous conjuncture of, one economic theater shut down effectively with the Turks, and then another one completely opening, and then Katie bar the door.
Exactly. Right. This is basically the time when the Roman Empire finally collapsed fully, right? Because what a lot of people don't talk about is that after Western Rome, the Western Roman Empire falls in around 460 or whenever that was, there still was the Eastern Roman Empire until that event, right? Until the Ottomans sacked Constantinople, basically, in around 1450 or so. Sorry, Dylan, you were going to say.
Yeah, no, that was good, and I just wanted to add this, that it's important to mention that particularly if we're talking about leaving stage 4 and going back to stage 3, it's not like there's this clean cut that happens, right? And Quigley points this out, as he said, that there's basically a masking effect as the new age of expansion is coming up while the old age of conflict is dying down. And he mentions that the last imperialist war of the first age of conflict, so we're looking at 1270 to 1440, was the series of struggles called the Italian Wars from 1494 to 1559. Yeah. These began with an excuse rather than a cause, just as the earlier Hundred Years' War had done. The cause of both of these was the need for the institutionalized feudal system to wage war in order to make a living. In other words, war had become an end to itself, as is usually the case with any institution. In each case, hordes of unemployed nobles were eager to support any claim, no matter how flimsy, for the sake of booty and military service.
Yeah, if you're into Netflix shows, The Borgias is a good show to watch. That's exactly this kind of period. The Italian wars, Venice going to war with Milan and France, and all this drama going on. And you had a very corrupt Borgia Pope Alexander. But that's just if you're into that kind of drama. Now, should we talk more about state commercial capitalism, Jones, or anything else?
I think we can move on to the second age of conflicts, because I mean, state commercial capitalism is the second age of expansion. Basically, they got new technology that supplants the old technology. You start getting the towns, you start getting the bourgeoisie, and there's new life, even though you kind of have this trailing off of the initial age of conflict and all these imperialist wars.
Yeah.
And I think when we go ahead.
Just to point out, so in feudalism, the main power source was just brute force, right? Because that's also the word feud means conflict, right? So feudalism gives the power to just the strongest sword and whatnot, the strongest knight. And we move from that to commercial capitalism, where the power is in the ability to trade goods, not necessarily to manufacture large goods, large scale, or have large scale factories or whatever, although they did trade small manufactured goods under the system too. But the power just shifts from brute force to more complex power, the ability to manage trade routes and all what that comes with it. And that system, sorry, you were going to say something else, Dylan?
No, I'm. Go ahead and finish. I'm going to move on to the.
So this state commercial capitalism, still conscious control dominates, right? So it's state managed. The typical organization is a chartered company. These are chartered by states, right? These are not just necessarily individual entrepreneurs who come up with an idea. And this begins to petrify, or is threatened to petrify, into a state mercantilism, as Quigley calls it. And that's a system where the states that are in charge of chartering these companies and all, they start trying to restrict the flow of goods because people are becoming too wealthy, too prosperous, too much level playing field. They don't like that. So that's where France, in the 1690 through 1850, begins to attempt control of this type of system. France was a naval power and obviously a big colonial power at the time, and they tried to where previously it was England trying to control feudalism. It's now France trying to control state mercantilism.
And then I want to read some examples that Quigley gives just on this point that Nima's bringing up.
Mm-hmm.
So governments did all they could to discourage such innovation, the invention of this second round of expansion, in the late 17th century, in contrast to the late 16th, when they still sought to reward it. In England, the patent power was used to prevent new techniques rather than to encourage them. As early as 1623, the Privy Council ordered destruction of a machine for making needles. Cloth buttons, rather than bone, were forbidden in 1698, while Indian calico was forbidden in 1686. A law of 1666 ordered all persons to be buried in wool rather than in traditional linen. And I'm not going to take the time to read the whole page, but it's just example after example after example of all these laws getting passed that are there to stifle innovation as opposed to reward it.
Yeah, so you try to use your own buttons, right? And like the Roman centurions or style knights show up and knock you over the head or whatever. Imagine today somebody was collecting rainwater and they were getting SWAT teamed by some. Oh wait, that did actually. Just saying, same mentality.
Or with technology now, this whole idea of right to repair and all this stuff, where the companies, or you see with cars a lot with cars, where the companies try to control who can fix the cars, and of course has to be their clothes shop and all this.
Yes,
right. And they build the cars that you need special tools, like their $2,000 box of special tools to fix them in the first place. Getting distracted. Right. Sorry, they become
harder to fix for sure. So now, France, Western civilization is under the threat of being taken over and turning into a universal empire under French rule. And that conflict is basically 1690 through 1850. So what happens in the meantime, right? When I say conflict 1690 through 1850, we all know what starts developing across the ocean from France and England during this period, 1700s, 1800s, actually mid 1700s, early 1700s, England is where the Industrial Revolution begins, right? And so that is then the next phase of expansion that we're moving into. That, yeah, you were.
Yeah, well, and before we get there, I really wanted to emphasize, because Quigley has 4 awesome points here on just what the battle of the institutionalized second phase looked like versus the instrument phase, or the I'm getting my words mixed up. The second conflict battling with the third expansion. There we go. Mm-hmm. What exactly that looked like, because when we're talking about France trying to take control, we're all thinking Napoleon, right? I think on the last show you pulled up, John pulled up a map of like the huge territory that Napoleon conquered. This was the Universal Empire, and Napoleon attempting to conquer and control the now institutionalized instrument of expansion of the second phase of Western civilization. And there was 4 points. Quigley said that there wasn't just 4, but he talks about 4 here, that Napoleon was really trying to fight the wave of the future with methods of the past. The first was in financial matters. Now, I know anybody listening to this is, when I say the Bank of England, they're going to like pull their hair out, because I'm going to make it sound like something good, right? I'm not getting into the conspiracy or the politics behind the Bank of England, other than to point out that the Bank of England allowed currency creation to happen when it was needed. Most of Western civilization suffered with a lack of cash in order to invest in capital projects. So the Bank of England gets formed in 1694, and Napoleon was fighting for the idea that bullion is money. Well, bullion is whatever you can pull out of the ground. And if you can't pull it out of the ground, you don't get any. And if it gets shipped off to China, because China has a silver standard, and they're gobbling up silver everywhere, and all the silver leaves Europe and goes to China, well, then it's just gone. And so what the Bank of England did is it put money creation in control of the government who needed the money, as opposed to, scouring the earth for wherever the gold and silver was. And the effect of this is that, well, Napoleon has to scramble and find his gold and silver to fund things, versus if we need currency to finance a project, we can just create it. That was
also talking about instrument to institution, right? The Bank of England in 1690, whatever, is obviously a very different animal from the Bank of England in 2024. As we've talked about on all these 3 episodes, instruments turn to instruments who actually have some good purposes at their time. They turn into useless or even counterproductive institutions.
The second one, and I kind of feel this is the most important one, is food production. So the old style, the second phase of expansion, food production system, was you had farms that had a 2-year cycle system. 1 year you grow food, the next year you let it grow fallow to regenerate the soil, and you just go back and forth and back and forth. England, at the beginning of the agricultural revolution, develops a 3-tier system, which is you have food 1 year, leguminous crops like clover the next year, and then animals the 3rd year. So you get you really only have 1 out of the 3 years where you're not really producing anything. And then when you do let it grow fallow, you have a much more potent plant that's reintroducing nitrogen into the soil. And then obviously with the animals, you get fertilizer from the manure. And this does 2 things. First of all, you're getting more plant production out of the soil. And second of all, you're now trying to keep animals in instead of keeping them out, which allows you to control their breeding. And I think, was there a point in here? No, I can't find it. But there's some point in the book where Quigley mentions, like, if you look at historical records of animal weights at this time, over a period of like 50 years, they go from like an average of 70 pounds hanging weight to an average of 250 pounds hanging weight for, I don't remember, lamb or sheep or something, right? But like tripled. The meat production, because they can control the breeding, tripled. So this is huge that England's now doing this instead of fighting for the old way, which Napoleon wants to cement. The third important element was the manufacture shift from a craft system to a manufacture or craft system of manufacture to an industrial system, which can more easily and succinctly be said a shift from human and animal power to chemical power.
Mhm.
This is the onset of the Industrial Revolution, and of course, the food production part helped the second part, because by producing more food, we don't need as many people working in food. Now we have the excess population that can have its energies turned toward industrial manufacturing.
And how convenient too in England that you have the rise of this three-tiered system, and this of course creates the enclosure movement, which kicks out all of these people off the land,
Right,
into the city. So you're almost one hand washes the other in this setup.
Exactly. And then the last one that he points out here is on the Napoleonic side, we find ranged all forces of mercantilism, meaning theories and the vested interest forces that believed that economic life had to be regulated by the government and regulated for largely political ends. And I think that the easiest way to summarize that point is Napoleon, according to Quigley, firmly believed that there was a finite source of wealth in the world and everybody had to fight for that slice of pie. Versus what's happening in England, which is to say, hey, we can create more wealth.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see it from this way, what's going on in England and shortly thereafter the North America, there's no way that France could have won in the long term. I mean, yeah, okay, maybe. Well, let's say Napoleon lost the battle of or won the Battle of Waterloo, and he formed an empire, but he solidifies the old system. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution's happening over in England. He wouldn't have been able to keep it.
Yeah, I mean, look how many. Just look at this disparity between the mercantilism and this new English system, and you see. I mean, how many coalitions did the British throw at Napoleon, and he kept defeating all of it. Was getting embarrassing. I think it was like 8 or 9 coalitions they had to form. It's like almost like the Ukraine war. It just keeps falling apart, but they just keep throwing new coalitions. And you're right. If he defeated them at Waterloo, they would just scratch together another one because they have those financial means to do that.
Right. Like I said, like, okay, Napoleon, you're fighting with muskets. They're not at machine guns yet. It's a little anachronistic for me to say machine guns, but they're essentially working on rifles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and mass production. If we will, the numbers that he gives, I believe this is in Tragedy and Hope, is that before the agricultural revolution, it took 20 people working in food production to support 21 people. So if 20 people work in food, you can support one person doing something else. After the agricultural revolution, when we have this 3-tier farming system, it took 3 people working in food to support 21 people.
Wow. Yeah, wow.
Massive difference. Massive difference.
A good point that actually the Industrial Revolution wouldn't have been possible without the Agricultural Revolution, right?
Right.
And somewhere in A Tragedy and Hope, Quigley also mentions how crucial to the West's success the proper order of these different revolutions.
Yeah, it's right at the beginning here.
Right. Whereas in other countries, like if you have an industrial, if you have a farming revolution or agricultural revolution, without a subsequent industrial revolution, you're able to feed a whole bunch of people. You increase the population hugely, but there's nowhere to put them to work to continue expanding. But the Industrial Revolution or the industrialization just caught those people right there and was able to put them in lines of work where civilization could continue growing. And then also he talks about the sanitation revolution at one point, right? He talks about how disastrous it was.
I've got the list right here, Nima.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
This is page 22 of Tragedy and Hope.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. So this is going over the various revolutions that happened during this time in Western Europe, and then compares what order they went in Asia. So the first thing that happened was Western ideology, which let's just paint a big stroke and call individualism, right? Okay, Western ideology. The second one was revolution in weapons. The third one was the agricultural revolution. The fourth, the industrial revolution. The fifth, the sanitation and medicine revolution. 6, demographic explosion. And 7, revolution in transportation and communications.
And
here's what happened in Asia. Well, go ahead.
Well, he talks about how disastrous. I guess you were going to just talk about.
I'm going to address that.
Yeah.
So, to Nima's point, each one of these kind of like, and John, you were noticing earlier, each one of these just kind of feeds into the next one. And I do want to emphasize the importance in weapons. The reason why he puts weapons at the beginning is because what the firearm did is it leveled the playing field in terms of who could control who.
It democratized society. That's what he said.
Exactly. It democratized society because a small group couldn't dominate a large group because everybody had the same weapons. Now, in Asia, first we had a revolution in weapons, then a revolution in transport and communications, then a revolution in sanitation and medicine, then an industrial revolution, then the demographic explosion, then the agricultural revolution, and last, if it ever happened at all, Western ideology. And I mean, I don't want to sit here and read pages and pages out of Tragedy and Hope, but one of the points that he points out here is that governments in Europe in 1830 hardly dared to oppress their people because of the weapons. And democracy was growing. But in the non-European world by 1930 and even by 1950, governments did dare to and could oppress their peoples who could do little to prevent it, because when the weapons came in, no one could have, I mean, okay, here's all these firearms. Well, the society is such that the peasants can't afford or acquire those firearms, so they all go to the vested interests up top of the society, and everything happens backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that point very distinctly from Tragedy and Hope. Quigley leads off with that whole meditation on the disparity of weapons and the equality of weapons and how that plays a role in history. So we see it here in the Evolution of Civilizations and also in the more well-known Tragedy and Hope.
For sure.
Yes.
And right, so basically you need, if you have a sanitation, for example, what he also talks about, if you bring a revolution to another society that isn't ready for it, then that's going to be disastrous. So, for example, he talks about Americans brought guns to the Native Americans, but the natives didn't know how to produce them, and they didn't know how to make their own gunpowder, as far as I know. So if stuff broke, they were completely dependent on the Westerners, and they could manufacture them themselves. So I think it's important to go through these stages organically, step by step, and not just drop it on a society and then think that that'll make everything greater. Also, I think he talks about how England brought the sanitation revolution to India too early, and then that caused population to explode.
Well, and then he says here specifically the big issue, if you get the order wrong, is if you have the industrial revolution before the agricultural revolution.
Yeah.
And he points out here that in Asia, food for labor could be obtained only by, let me read the full sentence. But in Asia, where the sequence of these three revolutions was different, generally transportational, industrial, then agricultural, labor could be obtained because of the sanitary medical revolution. We have so many more people, but food for this labor could only be obtained by oppressing the rural population and preventing any real improvements in the standard of living.
Another area that strikes me in this neck of the woods where something is dropped, a great expression, is dropped onto a culture that's not ready for it. In the past 20 years in these United States, and even in the last century with decolonization and so forth, all of these democratic governments, put up in Afghanistan, put up in the Middle East, and they just collapse because it's just not native to the people, and they haven't the state.
They don't have the point number one that we had, which is the Western ideology.
Yeah, start there. Yes.
Yeah, to even grasp that. So, in terms of time, let's keep moving on.
Yeah. So we are at we are in the Industrial Revolution, right? This is the third phase of expansion of the West. This is where people start profiting through the production of goods and through the scaling of the mass production of goods. And industry, actually, the word originally means, I think, clever. So applying cleverness and skill to start accumulating a surplus. And then obviously you already have the trade routes and all that. So now industrial capitalists can just hand off their goods to the people who've previously under commercial capitalism developed these shipping routes and these shipping skills and all that. And now the industrial capitalists are the ones calling the shots. So you notice how every new kind of capitalism supplants the previous one and takes advantage of what's there and sort of puts it in their service, right? So industrial capitalism, we put things together. That's the main skill, and we're clever about it, and that's what grants you power. And then what Quigley also points out, this is where automatic control once again dominates. So we go back. In the beginning, we had automatic under feudalism. Then we go to conscious under commercial capitalism with a chartered company. Industrial capitalism, we have a more decentralized system again. Different private companies, private firms / partnerships competing with each other and developing more complex goods and production methods. And this is, of course, also the revolutionary period, right? This period of expansion is a very crucial period. It gave us politics as we know it today. Everything we talk about in politics today, the left, the right, socialism, capitalism, these are all terms that come from 1780s France originally, right? And there's a good book, by the way, you've probably read it, John, I don't know, but The Fire in the Minds of Man.
Yeah, sure.
By James H. Billington, who was the director of the Library of Congress, a good source. He talks about how the three strands of political thought basically were birthed in that period, in the 1780s. And the political left versus political right was based on the people who were sitting on the left and on the right on the tennis court from which the country of France was run, basically, right? They set up a parliament on a tennis court. And so what he says is the three strands are encapsulated in the French rallying cry, brotherhood, freedom, and equality. And each of these three different revolutionary slogans turn into its own revolutionary movement, right? You had a brotherhood, or I forget the French word, fraternity
or something like that.
Yeah. Brotherhood became nationalism. Liberty became libertarianism / constitutionalism. And equality became socialism. So to this day, we're basically still in the mode of a paradigm that was started in that expansion phase of industrial capitalism. Now, under expansion 3B is financial capitalism. And financial capitalism emerged at the later stages of industrial capitalism because industrial capitalism required larger and larger factories and longer term financing structures in order for it to work. So you couldn't just tell someone, hey, give me some money and you'll turn a profit tomorrow. It would be, you'll turn a profit in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years. So a new kind of financing structure for this was needed, and this was the corporation / the holding company. And investment bankers specialized in pooling lots of money from smaller pools and individuals into very large pools that were then available for the industrialists to continue expanding their businesses. So, in financial capitalism, the main source of accumulating savings became turned from the factory owner producing stuff and keeping a profit. Instead, it became the capitalist selling and buying stocks and bonds from these funding operations in order to make a profit on the price differential. So in other words, if somebody can figure out that a particular business is going to do better than everyone's expecting right now, he's going to buy up their stocks. And then if what he expected comes true, the stock price will go up, he sells the stock, he makes a profit. This becomes the main profit generation mechanism and the main power pool of capital and money in the society. So the industrialists start becoming dependent on these financial wizards, on
who want seats on the board of the company. That's worth emphasizing. Yes.
The board. So that's why Quigley says here, under financial capitalism from 1850 through 1932, it was banker management, because bankers got seats on the boards.
Can I interrupt you real quick, Nima? I want to talk something from personal experience.
Yeah.
So Andrew Carnegie is probably the guy who's going to lead us into conflict number 3. Apparently is the guy who figured out how to get around this banker management situation. And when I learned how to do business acquisitions, this is the guy who taught me this history, is I was taught you never, ever, ever want to give up equity in your business for someone who brings money. Right? Hey, Nima, I want to start a business. I need $1 million. And Nima goes, yeah, okay, I want a 50% seat in the company. Well, now Nima controls 50% or whatever percentage he's going to control, and I have to answer to him. But what's his incentive? His incentive is I need to see a profit. I need to see a return. Well, my emphasis may be, I kind of want to do the thing that I want my business to do. I want to do the good or the service that it's supposed to do. So as the stuff is focusing more and more on the bankers getting involved, and this is still an issue today, you're ceding power over to people whose interest isn't – it's kind of a de facto vested interest because they care about the bottom line profit, which I'm not saying it's not important. Obviously it is, but they care about the bottom line profit as opposed to whatever the hell else might be going on in the world. And basically Andrew Carnegie came up with the idea of how do I just do traditional lending, which is to say, give me a loan, I'll pay you your interest, but you don't have any control on the board. Or you don't have any equity. That's how I was taught to do business acquisitions, because you never, ever, ever want to give up equity just because somebody brought money to the table.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So now we have this situation where the investment bankers facilitate this exponential expansion of these business operations into conglomerates, into mega corporations, into large entities that are, no longer the individual factory manager managing his factory, accumulating profits. So what happened then was, ironically, now the bankers have created these giant behemoths. They became so powerful, so big, and made such large profits that they could now start using their own profits to expand. No longer needed once again, didn't need the investment bankers. And this is when the system turns into monopoly capitalism.
Well, and sorry, I think you misspoke. You said that the bankers accumulated the profits. You mean the businesses accumulated the profits,
right?
And then
fund
their own. Yeah, that's what you meant to say. Got it.
Right, yeah. These large conglomerates, they also start merging, and you have cartels and all that kind of stuff happening. So the system petrifies into monopoly capitalism, where actually bankers don't necessarily like that system all too much, because now they're sort of second grade, right? They're still needed, right, but the corporations have taken the baton back. And it's not just in industrial small businesses like in the beginnings, but now it's mega corporations, mega conglomerates. Actually, just what comes to mind is, for example, GE is a bank. They're called General Electric, but they're one of the largest banks in America. Or I don't know if that's still the case, but at least until the financial crisis, 2008, they were a mega bank. But started as an industrial concern, but then I guess maybe as part of this whole thing, they started taking over the business of banking because they controlled so much money. Now,
and then just to give another example to that, imagine Amazon. Does Amazon need to go begging to a bank if they need to fund something?
Exactly. So now we get into the era of the third conflict, which happens whenever the system begins to monopolize, or whenever the capitalist system begins to be consolidated under one giant power. That's when we have a conflict phase. And according to Quigley, between 1893 and 1945, Germany attempts to take control of this monopoly capitalist system. And what is this conflict? So conflict number 3, what does it consist of? We have cartels and trade associations. It's monopoly capitalism. Now we profit from the manipulation of the market to make the market price and the amount sold such that the profits would be maximized. So a lot of it starts just becoming manipulation rather than industriousness and cleverness. You start once again trying to restrict the amount of goods so that you have all the power. So this system Quigley calls it manager manage, right? So because the managers become very powerful because they have such intricate know-how of these very complex operations, there's only very few people who, even now today, for example, I think there's only like 10 people who understand how to drill oil in the Russian tundra. So when these people these people have a lot of power basically. So managers almost get more powerful than the shareholders and people with lots of money, or at least they rise to that level, or they can ask for a lot of money from those people in order to provide their services. So that's the third conflict phase. And Quigley posits that, so he wrote Tragedy and Hope in 1966, right? So now we're getting into the territory where we have to speculate a little bit and try to see how do we make this whole model consistent with the past and with what Quigley has written about in the past and with what we're seeing happening right now. So in 1945, I would say this third conflict was ended, and Germany's attempt to control the system of monopoly capitalism is thwarted, and we have a new type of capitalism emerging. And this is now, Europe
Gray
is in a
zone
bubble.
now.
What was it?
We're in the gray zone now because we don't have Quigley to sit here and tell us what's going on.
So if you can zoom in a little bit to expansion number 4, because Dylan and I were borrowing a little bit also from Peter Zehan's geopolitical analysis. Not that I recommend Zehan necessarily for everything, but he has some good insights on some things that I hadn't thought about before. So Quigley calls it a pluralist economy starting in 1945. Or he speculates. He's not clear, right? He's not firm on it.
And to emphasize that, Quigley says, I'm 20 years after the fact right now.
Yeah.
That's not enough time.
Yeah. It's too early
for me to see what's going on yet.
Right. It's too early to say. So I would call this, I wrote here technocracy. Maybe we could even call it globalism, honestly. 1945, I think, is a good cutoff point to say this is when globalism began. And what was the crucial factors of globalism? So Quigley says here that lobbying groups start playing a big role. Technocrats start playing a big role. I would also say this is when scientism becomes the dominant dogma of the West. Is the latter half of the 20th century. Peter Zehan suggests that America patrolling the oceans was a crucial component of the massive growth from 1945 through 2015. I think that's pretty clear. The numbers that Zehan presents in his analysis are pretty striking, pretty stunning, actually. For example, he talks about how shipping has become a rounding error because of mass shipping, the
cost of shipping, yeah.
You used to have to pay something like 30% of a product price for shipping way back in the days when, commercial capitalism, etc., or even before, even the early 1900s. But now it's come down to fractions of a percent, like 0.001% or whatever. So it has changed the game. The military power that America has accumulated in the prior years was crucial to its ability to patrol the oceans and enable this system of global production trade under American oversight.
Control the oceans to make it safe enough for anybody to trade whoever else they wanted to.
Yes, because and we're seeing a system break apart right now, by the way, and Zehan predicted this. So we are seeing tankers seized almost every other week or so somewhere, and this is going to be very traumatic, I think.
Before you get too far into the current situation, if you don't mind, I want to give a clearer idea of what Quigley means by a pluralist economy, and I think I found a good paragraph right here that describes it. So the control of the money supply, which had been one of the chief attributes of the banking system before 1929, became an attribute of the government after 1945. And one word that we forgot to say in the third expansion here was the word laissez-faire.
Mm-hmm.
The third age of expansion was dominated by laissez-faire, which is everybody does whatever the heck they want, right? The fourth one is controlled by government planning. And this is what he's getting into in this paragraph. So the money supply becomes an attribute of the government. Control of the money supply becomes an attribute of the government after 1945. And the government exercised its control under pressure from shifting alliances and alignments of the great economic power blocks it surrounded. These blocks came to include finance, heavy industry, light industry, commercial and service groups such as real estate, civil servants, the armed services, labor, farmers, transportation, and others. If any one or several of these blocks became too obviously exploitative of the others form an alignment to pressurize the government in another direction. The chief consequence of such alignments and pressures has been to increase government spending and thus to increase inflation. I can keep reading, but I think the point that's important here is instead of a banking system that just kind of creates stuff for whatever someone wants to go chase for an idea, now the money supply is firmly in control of the government. And they say, we decide where it goes, but in our modern democratic/Republican systems, that means whoever can influence the appropriate people in the legislature and the executive branch decides where it goes. And so because you now have these big power blocks that are a result of the monopolist capitalist system, they vie for power. And at least at the beginning, the instrument of expansion phase, which me and Nima could get into, I don't know if it's going to be today, we can get into, we do believe there was a new instrument of expansion after the third age of conflict, or a new age of expansion after the third age of conflict. The expansion is from the government creating the money to utilize the resources, and the instrument quality of it is the fact that these multiple blocks are never able to fully get power over the other one.
It's an oligarchy that you're describing almost.
It is.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's an accurate way of saying it. It's an oligarchy, but it, in quotes, works because it leads to expansion.
And it's a global oligarchy. It's no longer, national boundaries are no longer relevant to those people. And this is also the era of the United Nations for that reason, obviously, right? Mega banks continue to play a role. We have more global interconnectedness than ever before. Shipping cost per product has become a rounding error. Living standards grew, we have to admit, from 1945 through 2015. All the objective markers of growth exploded. Population, goods produced, knowledge expansion, all these things, incredible scientific discoveries, sometimes not necessarily for the better, but nonetheless, invention of the internet. Also, what I wrote down here.
And these are all kinds of expansion. That's why Nima's listing them off. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If you could zoom in a little bit, that would be great. Because I had to write smaller. I have to make this look a little better. So also, rise of the global NGOs, I think, is interesting, because I don't think if there's ever a period in time where there was such a thing as the Gates Foundation, or this or that, exerting massive control over not just charitable giving, but really expansion of industry for whatever purposes. I mean, these people really pull all strings and all levers to benefit whoever it is. They want to benefit pharmaceutical company. If you think about Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their control of the media, the money they're spending to run infomercials and peddle them as news stories to the public, to take this shot and that pill and this thing and that, whatever. So I think there's almost a new kind of entity that emerged during that period that we're still seeing today. So also population size expanded, obviously, like I said. At the same time, this was the prime of Malthusianism, setting the stage for reaction to this in the conflict phase. So I don't know when Malthus exactly wrote his stuff, but I think in the 20th century is when it really became fashionable to talk about, too much people and too many people. You need
useless eaters. Yeah.
Useless eaters, etc. Minsky, as I mentioned here, Minsky, because I also read some Minsky. Minsky identifies a distinct phase that he calls money manager capitalism, starting in 1969. Money manager capitalism is basically the gigantic pools of money under control of one fund manager. Today we have these famous fund manager geniuses. They aren't really that good at what they do, right? But they just have massive control over the BlackRocks of the world. They have massive control over industry. And now what I think is really crucial, what has grown more and more through this phase is data collection. Data collection becomes more and more important. And I think that's also why opinion molding is so universal now. The system is technocrat managed. And once again, conscious control dominates versus automatic control during this period. This is a very top-down managed system. And I also took a note here. The invention of the internet lays the groundwork to return to automatic control sooner or later, in my opinion. But then this is not quickly. This is just my thoughts on this. But I just want to make a point.
We're past Quigley at this point. Just to emphasize that Quigley dies in the 70s. He leaves us.
This system, I think. So I just wanted to talk about the progression once again. Feudalism, brute force. Commercial capitalism, trading routes. Industrial capitalism, cleverness and putting things together. Financial capitalism. In order to fund a project successfully, you need to be able to predict things. So you need to crunch data. So in financial capitalism, data becomes the main point. The main thing that the people that run the economy concentrate on, the banking oligarchs. And then we saw financial capitalism was about to turn monopoly capitalism. The globalist capitalism economy thwarted that. But that system is now, in my opinion, it's petrifying into something that I would call data monopoly capitalism. I don't know if that's a thing, if anyone else is saying stuff like that. I know this Schwab minion, Yuval Ferrari or Euthyphro Ferrari, whatever his name.
Yes.
He coined the term dataism. And,
I've seen the term data capitalism in the Foreign Affairs journal, the CFR journal. I've seen that years ago. It was brand spanking new. So that thing's being kicked around.
Interesting. Yeah. So
that is very interesting
because now the data, and I know it sounds like a trope because we hear it all the time, data, but it's really become this precious resource and the bottleneck which gives you control, which makes or breaks the success of a venture. It's just access to data. And especially now, they have gone so above board with this. They are now collecting data points on everyone and everything, every second of what you're doing.
We all know we're all going to get ads after this conversation showing stuff that we talked about during this conversation.
Yes.
So this is, I think, what has really, but it is because data has been, since financial capitalism, data has been a resource or a resource that gives you power, and it's just because it's now played out, right? They've abused data so much. We're now at a point where they can't find any more data. They need to dig deeper and deeper into our personal lives and all this stuff.
Wow. Yes.
So that's why I think data capitalism and now data monopoly capitalism is the conflict
Fourth phase. And just so we're keeping track here, end of World War II is we're in round number 4 of expansion, and now team is getting into round number 4 of conflict.
Yes. So now I put the demarcation at 2001. Okay, so so you can scroll down a little bit to the next phase.
Zoom out a little bit.
This might be at this point in the interview. This might be a good time just to kind of sketch this out for our next installment. Yeah, and then we can really dive into it.
Yeah, and don't show the bottom part. Don't show the bottom part.
Okay, let's just stop the share. How about that?
No. Because I just want to get into briefly the conflict that we're in, and then let's sketch it out, and then we can. So we are, in my opinion, I think 2001 is a good cutoff point because, and I can't necessarily say scientifically why or whatever. I can only say that I feel like everything changed in 2001. Everything turned darker and gloomier in 2001. All the things that we still believed in the 90s and all that, they came shattering down on us. And so that's why I think 2001 is a good cutoff point. Obviously, we had the Vietnam War, but those were, I think, the first attempts to break us down.
I think, and I'm not saying I agree with it, I believe there's a legitimate reasoning that you could say that the Vietnam War was not an expansionist imperialist war, right? We were fighting communism, and communism was taking over, and it was a real bad. I'm not saying I agree with it. You could make that case. Yeah. By the time we get to Iraq number 2, it's like, get real. Yeah. What are we doing over here? What are we doing? Right.
So 2001. So this is the phase where I just rattle off these bullet points real quick. Global technocrats attempt control of everything by restricting competition. So once again, we see the symptoms of conflict, the restriction of everything, of competition in business, in media, in politics, in religion, in science, in social life, even lockdowns. So just think of lockdowns, social distancing, all these things.
Well, and they have half the population trained to violently attack the other half at this point.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is instruments of class oppression, like we discussed the other day, right? Elite ideology officially petrifies into open Malthusianism. So now it's no longer whispering Malthusian here. Now Bill Gates does a TED talk and talks about how do we get these numbers down, right? So,
How do we remove these people? How do we stop industrialization because it harms the environment? How do we stop using so much energy? How do we? Yes, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So how can you make as small of an impact as possible on the world? That sort of thing.
Open Malthusianism to reduce the things we achieve in the expansion phase. Nothing is possible. We can't do shit anymore, right? You want to build a bridge there? No, you're going to hurt some turtle. You want to do this? Oh, no, you're going to hurt the Delta smelt in the San Francisco Valley River. The ideology is totally being molded into a restrictive ideology from the previous adventurous expansion phase. The attempt to monopolize data access that I was just talking about, data access, collection, dissemination. And so that's why I'm saying here, maybe call it data monopoly capitalism. Conscious control petrifies into global totalitarianism, and global elites try to consolidate it under a global government. I think that's where we are, right? This is a conflict we are right now. And I'm just saying here, okay, I think this conflict could last until about 2030, not much longer. If I look at the previous conflict phases, they've gotten shorter and shorter. So I think it's feasible. This phase might not take much longer than 30 years or so.
And we'll leave a teaser for the next show. We are... I want to say confident. I'm not saying it's a deterministic thing that's going to happen. I mean, like we see a bright and optimistic outlook that there is a 5th instrument of expansion being developed right now that will revitalize us back again into an age of expansion. Exactly. It's the fall of Rome. In the American Empire, it's all over. We're getting invaded. There's problems, but if you understand it from the Quiglian aspect, and I think like we talked about between phase 1 and phase 2, where we're seeing the new instrument of expansion happening while the imperialist wars from the first phase are still going on. There's overlap. There's overlap, and if we can identify the institutionalized instrument of expansion from stage 4 and identify what the new instrument of expansion of stage 5 could be like, then we can then it's not like Nima said at the beginning. It can stop being deterministic.
Mhm.
We can identify what's going on, focus on it, and fix it.
Excellent. And I think that consciousness about the shortness of these ages as we move along, that may explain some of the behavior of the powers that be who evidently feel that they're behind the ball and are hustling, and that might explain some of the speed of things too. It's almost like a fight to the knife.
Mm-hmm.
They've always started hustling and panicking, as we just went through the past conflict phases. That's always the phase when you see that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Good. What a good teaser we have for our next installment. This is such a juicy topic, and we really have so much to still get into, and I look forward to that. For the audience, the previous episodes are down below, as I'm sure everyone has seen at this point. And then Dylan and Nima, anything else we should bring up with Arita TV in terms of projects and whatnot? Maybe a special interview or two?
Head over to our website, irita.tv, or find our YouTube channel. Or, I mean, we've got social media all over the place, but if you want our YouTube channel, just search Irita TV. It'll show right up. You'll find this logo, or me sitting next to the logo, and you'll know you found it. Great.
Well, to the audience, thank you for your attention here, and definitely check out their website, and then hop on over to Apocalypse Stacy's site and check out our coming seminar, as well as our bevy of anniversary events over this spring. And especially to yourselves, Nima and Dylan, thank you so much for your continuing expertise on these historical topics.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about it. It's one of our favorite subjects.